So why don't we get to start? I guess you want to start facilitating.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how to do this, but if anybody wants to go first, you could, or if nobody's feeling that, I could go first, or Saul, maybe you could.
Would it break the ice if Angela and I went first, or maybe Jordan? Do you want to go first? Because you have such amazing. I looked at your stuff this morning at 7 a.m. But how do you feel? Maybe it'd be great if someone from PI goes first.
Yeah, I can go first.
Cool. You should all be able to share your screen. I just changed the settings.
Okay, sweet. Let me do that. Oh, I have to open system preferences and like change something and then like quit and come back. So maybe someone else can start and then I'll go next.
Okay, is there anyone else that feels comfortable going now? I could go if that breaks the ice. How about that? Okay, why don't I go? So I'm going to share my screen. So maybe I should, can everyone read this poem? Maybe I should move it. Might make sense downloading it, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna download it.
Or open it, yeah. I'll fumble through this.
Yeah, it's gonna be a way of counter text. Okay, I'm going to just show the PDF because I think it's a little bit cleaner. There, can everyone can see this? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I was looking at the British North American Act as a starting point for the sort of intervention that I wanted to do, and what I created, and I was
just tell what it is.
Yeah, I'll contextualize it. So I am quite influenced by cut up poetry and stuff that was done by a lot of poets where they're either redacting various texts to create new work, or obviously with Brian Geist, this idea of when you sort of take an existing found object and you cut it up and you sort of reform it to, I guess, really to recontextualize the text and maybe show some hidden meanings. There's a lot of really amazing contemporary poets that are doing things like this, especially indigenous poets, that I find really, really interesting. So for me, I thought within the short period of time, what I would do is I would take the British North American Act, which was, I believe it was either discussed, signed, or sort of the foundations were put forward in Charlottetown. And I took either a word or words from each sort of like paragraphs, each point, and created a poem that I think sort of, I guess, in my mind, maybe shows the sort of underlying transgression of that document. So I'm just going to read it for you folks, and that's how I'll do it. It's also a bit of a concrete poem, so the structure itself it's very important to me because I feel it, because my practice is as a filmmaker, and I often work with poetry and text on screen, and I'm really interested in the way that text can be sculpted in a way to sort of be looked at and read at the same time. So that's why I sort of sculpted it like this. So I'm going to read this for you. Her, united, but not being that day, implied Canada shall be Canada, exists, severed, constitute passing, limits required, taken, declared time, time to time chosen, all powers, Queen's power, limitations declared otherwise, consisting time to time defined together, intervene, styled in relation, consolidated above all rents, dues, debts, charges, mortgages, and encumbrances. Summoned persons shall be summoned. The Queen thinks, except on a further time. Time shall be vacant, obedience, adherence, vacancy. If any question arises respecting time, its powers deemed to be in the negative, provisions can together being divided, numbered, so that each shall be entitled to return, vacated upwards, writ, returning of a writs Practical speed preside at absence. Reckoned voices are equal no longer. Diminished aggregate. Proportionate, imposing. Appropriation of the Queen's assent shall annul attested records. Yeah, so that's the work that I created. And maybe we can even just, if there's questions about anyone's work, we can either maybe save it to the end so everyone can have a chance to share their work. Cool.
But there might be, Saul, this is Karen. There might be a question because in fact we couldn't see your poem.
Oh no.
Yeah, this was
And I have a question about the form of it. Is this, are you taking the document you have and just removing spaces? Or how do you arrive at the form? I understand that you're removing words, but how do you arrive at what we're looking at?
Can you see this now?
Yes.
I'm so sorry for that.
yeah.
Okay.
No worries.
Okay, so here, I'll just sort of scroll through it. So what I did is I you know, oddly enough, it's very hard to find these documents. I don't know, maybe I was just in Google searching very well last night, and I did have a couple of glasses of wine to sort of chill out from an incredibly exciting day yesterday. But what I did is my one rule that I set myself was that I must use at least one word from each of the paragraphs that were used. And actually, I can show you. Can you see this now? Can you see my browser? So here's the text that I worked from. And what I did is I used the British North American Act 1867 Enactment 1. And everyone can everyone see this document that I have in front of us right now, the
Yep.
website document?
Yes.
Cool. So literally, like from each of these, like 1, 2, 3, 4, I would just select sort of like words that really stuck out to me, especially in terms of the implicit violence of this document from what I saw it as. And I tried to, and that was the one rule, is that it had to be sequential and it had to be at least one or several words from each paragraph. So that was my one rule. And after that, really it was just a process of, you know, I guess, can I say, for lack of a better word, poetic license. And for me, the sculptural element of the text is really important for me, which is why I'm sorry that I wasn't reading it well when everyone was there, which is why you can see here that I actually have, it's sort of like falling vertically, almost rather than horizontally, durationally. I see it as more of a spiritual thing vertically, and almost like a descent, and not the good kind of descent. And yeah, so that's the structure. And actually, I will post this on our website for those of you that would like to read it on your own. And yeah, so actually maybe it worked better that you didn't see it, because then you sort of were able to hear it. And that's why I was doing sort of pauses when I was reading. But yeah, does that answer your question, Karen?
Absolutely, yes, thank you.
And I apologize for that technical stuff. And yeah, awesome. Thank you. Okay, and we have some, oops, no image. Okay, awesome. Okay, so is there anybody that would like to go, that feels comfortable going next?
I think I can go next after that presentation.
Awesome, thanks, Agre.
Mine is, I'll share my screen.
I think you should be able to share a screen.
So it's an image of an ongoing piece of work. First of all, my name is Agre Agwata, that's my name. I was trying to find an image of me as a small boy to be part of this presentation, but then I didn't upload it. But then, yes, I come from East Africa. Kenya. I did my undergraduate from Kenyatta University in history, that's African history and art education. So a lot of history does influence what I'm doing, a lot of studies from other communities and other people. So this piece that you're looking at specifically is inspired by that aspect of history and by a community memorialization project that is ongoing. And it inspires from the local, it's inspired from the local community in Halifax. That's iMove, so it's at iMove, that's Centerline Studios, which is in Gottingen Street. A young man called Lance Perry, we did his celebration of life. He passed on, but he was a man who had changed and he had a life that had influenced other people to start seeing change. So that's the kind of context in terms of Halifax. And then the history part is he was a Black man. He identified as a Black man. His origin and ancestors, forefathers, you know. And the community of Black people within Halifax is also partly fused into this. So this is a kind of connection of Africa, where I come from literally, and where these people come from different generations, you know. They all know this is our home, you know. And it's a history of all people, in reality, every human being. So that's what I was trying, how can I answer these questions? How can I keep doing this? So I challenged myself to draw the map literally from memory. I did miss a lot, but I told myself, just keep going, you know. So when I look at it, it's a kind of sketch, but then I said, also another thing is it's open to the community now to contribute, and artists sign, you know, write their names in the studio when they come in, leave a mark on that. And then also it's inspired by the Kintsugi monologues, which is patching up broken pottery. So I used painter's tape on the wall to leave the spaces there. So if other artists come in and they're, you know, recording or doing anything in the studio, they can sign their name there. They can add anything to this piece. So it keeps moving. It's an organic piece in itself. Previous to that, I have done other pieces. I don't know if what's more to add to that, but to say also maybe on the Western parts, like I'm inspired by the Sankofa bird. It's part of what is on the image. There's an element of wildlife and nature and animals. And on the southern part of the African continent, where we have Kalahari Desert, the San people, who I believe are the oldest civilization on the planet, they live there. So that's how the images of, on the image I had where the lips appear and the mustache, I had, like I saw kind of people drumming and doing all these things, and I was like, wow, it's falling in place. So I didn't really prepare for that. Some of the parts on the piece, I came to see them later on as I'm progressing, like the part where there's an elephant. I didn't really imagine that. It came in later on after I've pulled off the tape, because when the tape was there, I did all the sketches, and there are stages of it documented as I was working. And we are still making a kind of film around the whole story. Then maybe I can show a couple of other pieces I've done before, unless somebody has a question. Oh, I see.
Yeah. Go ahead, Andre, if you want to do some more work. That's totally cool.
Yes, that piece I did it in Nairobi. I had gone to visit a friend of mine. She's an art collector, so I went in her bathroom. I literally wanted to go to the bathroom, but then I saw that there were pencils and there were art materials next to the bathroom, and I was like, oh wow, why is she keeping this here? And I sketched on the wall in the bathroom. When she came back, she found me there. She told me, just keep going, keep going. So that's how I did this piece. It was a spontaneous piece, but I call it In Search of Her True Self. I don't know, I didn't come up with that, she did. It's also another piece I've done before that I did in Nairobi, in Koinange Street. Koinange Street is known for sex trade and all these things. It's the red light district in Nairobi. And people there, didn't expect to see somebody do a piece like that in public, but then it was an art event. So many people came out. People had a lot of questions, and there were a lot of conversations that were sparked around that piece. Very interesting conversations. The other one done on the same day, sort of my view of what institutions and systems and academia can do in terms of adding or educating, labeling and control and censorship. These two pieces were also exhibited at the Kenya National Museums. And prior to that, in 2016, I hadn't really broken, but I find the human figure a lot in my pieces and studies around the human figure. But then I believe after doing this painting, that's when I started abstracting the human form more. And I think when I did this piece, that's when I lost the backgrounds in my pieces. The backgrounds all merged after this. And after that, I've not really had a piece that has a background that is typically what images have. Like that, for example, didn't have any background whatsoever. Yes, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Audrey.
Speak louder.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Sorry.
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I think it's really interesting, like how you work in relation to public. So like this piece that's shown on the screen right now, how it sort of grows with, people visiting the center, being welcome to add to it, or even the image below that, the next image where you've drawn on this person's wall. And, it makes me kind of think about institutions like the Confederation Center of the Arts or these arts institutions where, it's just something that unless someone was commissioned purposefully to come there and to do that work, this just would never happen. And I'm wondering about sort of the potential of this kind of spontaneous space, as you describe it, in these places. Yeah, I don't know if that's kind of not a great question, but I'm wondering if you could speak to that at all. If you.
My very first practice in public was done at the National Museum, and it didn't end as we planned because it was interrupted by police. Some of the questions that artists answer or some of the areas that our minds go to when we are expressing freely may not really be in these spaces because of the histories related to them. And sometimes I say it's a bold move when that happens, when these spaces welcome that kind of spontaneity and that kind of expression into them. And then stands by that, and says, we need to hear this story too. We need to hear this narrative too. I believe that's a powerful move. And in my view, I feel like the more we have that, then the more change we may be able to see.
Yeah, thank you, Agre.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Agre. Thank you for sharing. Cool. Let's maybe we'll now, okay, we'll move on to who, if does somebody want to go next? Maybe Agre, you might need to stop screen sharing if that's okay. I think you just stood on your.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Just
Uh,
move on. I just wanted, I don't know if I don't know if everybody sees Karen's comment in the chat, but I think this is a really interesting point that, seeing the way Agre is enacting painting, be it in somebody's bathroom or in the National Arts Center, that this is often the way that, music happens. And I think of correct me if I'm wrong, Jordan, but is there not a buskers festival in PEI, or am I thinking of Halifax? Is there something like that there?
Not like a buskers festival like in Halifax, but there's definitely a lot of busking happening anyway, and it definitely happens like on site at the Convet Center or like in its like immediate area all the time.
Yeah, I think I could. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Agre.
Also, if I may add something, the image I said was done in the street was during Power Festival. It's one of the biggest hip hop festivals in East Africa. So also we were doing a lot of spoken word, poetry and rap, and I was part of that also. Yeah.
That's great.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think just to finish off, sorry, but bringing it back to the space and these questions of what these spaces enable, this austere structure. I can't imagine, space in that complex being sort of primed for this kind of activity. And, if we're thinking about this as a living, the museum is a living monument, I think this project sort of brings forward some interesting points of reflection for a spatial kind of, a spatial way to sort of support or to seed these kinds of works. Yeah, thanks, Agre.
Cool. Jordan, how's your computer working? You want to try going next?
Yeah, I think my presentation is a good follow-up to what Angela just said, so I'll see if I can share my screen.
Awesome.
Okay. You guys can see this all good? Not that one.
Yeah, we can see it. Looks great.
Okay. And these are, I put a link in the chat so everyone can access this folder, hopefully, and just check out these materials on their computer as well if they like. So I put this together yesterday after the first workshop because I was interested in thinking about the difference between the sort of the prescribed uses of space or the sort of official uses of space versus personal uses of space, or daily uses of space, and how the site of the Confederation Center plays out on a day-to-day basis for individual people. My research in the MFA program in NASCAD is looking at amateur video made on PEI as a genre of folk art. And I'm interested in it because I think it often demonstrates ways of resisting prescribed ways to interact with local environments, which because PEI is an island and we have these strict topographical borders, it's really easy for the whole island to kind of become branded as one space and kind of branded under this umbrella of islandness. So there's a lot of sort of prescribed ways, especially related to like tourism and arts and culture, and the way that arts and culture plays into tourism, that sort of tell visiting people and also local people how they're supposed to, respond to the environments we live in. So I took some writing from the Confederation Center's website, just in the mandate section, I think, and like the art history section. And I highlighted some words, like a lot of adjectives and things like that, that sort of stuck out to me. So I'll just read through these thoughts to kind of set the tone. The massive complex is located in the heart of downtown Charlottetown, with soaring architecture and outdoor plazas taking size of a full city block. Every Canadian played a part in the establishment of Confederation Centre. In 1964, the provinces and the federal government each committed 15 cents per capita for a total of 5.6 million to construct the huge building. In other words, each Canadian citizen contributed to the equivalent of 30 cents. This was the first time that all provinces agreed to invest in an institution outside of their boundaries. Covering an entire city block, the center stands on what was the site of the old Charlottetown Market. It houses several theaters, an art gallery, and then I crossed out restaurant and gift shop because those both closed last year. Open year-round, Confederation Centre showcases the best in Canadian visual and performing arts. Confederation Centre is the result of a dream shared by all Canadians to create a place where our country's history and multicultural character is celebrated, and where the talents of its people are nurtured and showcased. So some of the themes I pulled out of that text are civic duty and pride, scale, scale physically, monumental scale, but also scale symbolically, national scale, unity, national celebration, growth, grandness, historicness, and then absoluteness and universality. Also, if you have any questions, just jump on the mic because I can't see the chat. So feel free to stop me at any time. And then to contrast to that sort of like prescribed official way to interpret the site and way to, relate to the site, I just like jotted down some personal experiences with the site of the Confed Center that came to my mind. I've been like in and around the Confed Center my whole life, every year, I grew up about an hour outside of Charlottetown, on like the east side of Abequit, and they would bus us in every year to see like the Anna Green Gables musical. And I'm assuming that's like I was in school in the early 2000s, but I'm sure like if you were in school in the early 70s, it probably wasn't that different. But then also like I've had, my dad is a visual artist on PEI, so I've been going to openings there, and then I've worked there over 3 summers, in the past 10 years doing like different like short-term contracts and that kind of thing. And it's also just like, to say that it's the heart of downtown, I think is like, waxing pretty romantic, but it definitely is like a very significant downtown landmark. And I think when people think of like downtown Charlottetown, like that's where they mark it. And if you're just moving around in downtown Charlottetown, like this is a space that you're gonna come across and have to, navigate through in a lot of different ways. So some of the personal experiences I could think of relating to the Confed Center are over the summer, I started working in June and I was working in the office, and a lot of people were working from home still because of COVID. And it's like a pretty dark office. There's not a lot of natural light. And I just like felt like shit, like all this serotonin just like drained from my brain. And I would have to like go take breaks to like cry in the bathroom. And then some days I would eat my lunch outside and it would be, so hot and so humid. And like the only way to feel comfortable was to be like sitting in the shade of like these giant, kind of tower-like structures. I worked for a kids' day camp that's like set in like the basement of the Confederation Center in the summers. And I would always be worried because these kids would be like climbing all over like this concrete plaza. And I was like, these kids are gonna, like, I would tell them not to, but they would do it anyway because children. And I'd be like, these kids are going to like spill their brains on this concrete. Like this is like not, these are just like not compatible, like kids' heads and like concrete are not compatible materials. But when I was a kid, I used to go to the library at the Confederation Center to read books about dinosaurs mostly with my grandma. I remember meeting a date at the plaza because it's just like a well-known like landmark and everyone knows where it is and it's easy to find. I was in the basement over the summer of the Confed Center under like the Confed Center Art Gallery, and I found like stacks of like unused exhibition catalogs from like 30 years ago, including a bunch that my dad did when he was my age, and they're just, you know, they're still kind of in there, just like on a shelf against a wall. Over the summer, I was working for this art festival, Art in the Open, that happens in town. And we had to raise a banner against like the exterior wall at the Confederation Center. And, you know, I just remember being like so funny trying like in this process of like using this like jerry rig like hoist to like bring this banner up the wall. And I have a really fond memory of just like laughing with Amanda Shore and Ron Gallant and Jermaine Arsenault and like people who were working on this project, you know, as we tried to, you know, figure out how to like become engineers and like raise this artwork against the wall. I remember calling Ron, who's the head commissionaire, who's like the head security guard at the Confed Center and knows like everything about the facilities, because the elevator would break again, or the garbage wouldn't get taken away again, or the door would fall off its frame again, and he would have to come figure it out or call someone to help us figure it out. I was thinking about covering exhibition furniture in the basement of the art gallery with plastic tarps to keep them safe from leaks that would come down through the concrete, or having to mop up the floor of the art bunker where the kids camp was so that like the floor would be dry and not slippery when the kids came in the morning. And I was just like thinking about this during the mapping workshop yesterday and the ways that, you know, the idea of like a monument is supposed to be something that's infinite, and it's not supposed to like be, you know, laborious. You know, that's why like statues are often made in bronze, because it doesn't require a lot of maintenance. It's very, you know, it's permanent, you know, but then the reality, I think, which is interesting to contrast that with, is that, you know, all of these daily labors go into kind of pushing back against the fact that this building has been physically deteriorating since it was built in the 60s. You know, like I think the problems with the leaks, the problems with the foundation, they didn't get, you know, they were there immediately, and then they've kind of also been like unfolding over time. So those are some of my personal associations and things I was thinking about during the first workshop. And then because I'm interested in amateur video, I went onto YouTube and I tried to find some different, you know, different examples of how people relate to the space in a way that's not necessarily prescribed. So I'll share some short videos with you that I just found on YouTube. They're just public videos.
Prince Edward Island ground. Oh my God.
So that's skateboarding on the plaza. Those were zombies on the plaza. Hopefully these are playing all right. This person is driving from Kensington to Charlottetown in this sort of like really like beautiful sped up time-lapse video. So they leave Kensington and then they drive through the fields, and then they arrive eventually downtown Charlottetown at the site of Province House and the Confederation Center, which are sort of like, you know, they're right next to each other. They're sort of like the same area. And I think it just like is a good example of how they serve as like important landmarks and sort of like navigational points in Charlottetown. You know, if you're driving to Charlottetown, like when you've reached the Confed Center, you know you're there. What else do we have? This is another video that takes place on the plaza. This is like, I'm assuming someone's like high school class project. And they're just walking around the plaza of the Confederation Center to a Radiohead song. And, you know, reporting all the information they've learned about homelessness in Canada. So, what else do we have? I have two more I want to share.
Plants, outdoor plants, beautiful plants, variety of plants. So this is the building. You see here, Confederation Center of the Arts. And any of Green Gables, this is, you will see everywhere her name because she wrote the novels inspired. I also already shared with you her house, the house of her imagination. These are beautiful.
So this person is doing a vlog of the Confederation Center like plaza, as well as Province House next door and earlier in the video.
This is the box office.
Yeah, and I think they're just doing this tour for their own enjoyment and their own interest. And you can find a lot of those as well, like a lot of vlogs, a lot of tours that are, you know, just done, you know, by people who aren't being paid, you know, by quote unquote amateurs on the plaza of the Confed Center. And there is a busker. So those are just like 6 examples that I pulled, but there's definitely a lot more out there. And then I just attached 2 interesting resources if anyone's wants to look at those. One is some writing that came out of the Flotilla Festival that I think happened in like 2017, and I was living away doing my undergrad at the time, so I didn't attend. So I like to look at these texts to learn more about that because I think it was like a really interesting gathering. And this is a map from the Mi'kmaq Confederacy website where they have Mi'kmaq names mapped out onto the Franco and Anglo place names of PEI. Yeah, that's my presentation. I will stop screen sharing now.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I'm like having some like serious moments of like belly laughter.
Oh, unbelievable. Oh my God.
I mean, it's interesting to see space use various like firsthand perspectives as opposed to like sort of like you said, how it's talked about on the website, especially your own experience. And I don't know, I know there's a few architects in the room, but you know, it's interesting to think about like how space is actually lived. You know, the structure is one thing, but like the actual lived experience is really what is space, I think. There's some really great stuff in the chat right now, and this will be available on the video recording. We've got some reflections on Anne of Green Gables and Flag War by Joey Wheel on Vimeo, apparently another interesting video that was made in the streets of downtown Charlottetown. So that'll all be available. Sarah Clift, you mentioned a very provocative thing here. The Confederation Center is ruin, ? And I'm just wondering, do you want to talk about that at all, or do you? Or would you be willing to talk about that at all? No pressure. I don't want to put you on the spot. I would, but my mic isn't working. Oh, okay. Let's see. Maybe I can disable talking. Oh, is it the mic on your end, like on your computer, or is it something through the Zoom channel here? Saul, did you make Sarah a participant?
Yeah, Sarah can speak.
Yes. Oh, it's your mic. Okay, cool. No worries then. I don't know. Do we want to discuss this idea? I mean, you mentioned in your reflections, Jordan, these instances of the building, the leaking, the sort of thing. What does it mean in terms of like thinking about monuments and counter monuments for a building like this to be, thought of as a ruin?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sarah says, I'm just thinking about its monumentality and the way in which its presence to permanence, its pretense to permanence is just that, a pretense. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then I'm thinking about like brutalism in general and this sort of nationwide sort of, I don't know, architectural, do we call it a movement? Brutalism is often talked about in relation to nation building, and specifically kind of happening around this time of Confederation. So the building is built as a monument to Confederation. So how can we think about this idea of pretense and structure in relation to monumentality, and now that it's falling apart. I read something, I think in the Guardian or something last night about how we're starting to see, one after the next, these renovations taking places to brutalist architectures. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or wants to comment on sort of fragments of
I think like if the Confederation Center is a living monument to Confederation, if it's a living monument, then what I really see that livingness is the sort of like blood, sweat, and tears of like trying to keep it from falling apart, which is a constant effort since like the moment it was built to present.
I'd like to comment a little bit on that. I was actually talking with someone about kind of the amount of time that the building was meant to last. I can't remember who it was with, but someone was telling me that like the Confed Center was built to last a specific number of years. And it seems interesting to plan a monument that's only supposed to last a certain amount of time, that like eventually it will like fall apart and need to be kind of repaired and fixed, or torn down maybe if it gets to a certain point.
I love that. I think the idea of a monument that's not intended to last forever would actually be really insightful and really forward thinking and really reflexive to the fact that the things we like value as a culture and the things we want to monumentalize are inevitably going to shift and change. And there's monuments in Charlottetown that people are trying pretty hard to scrap, to take down, like no one wants the John A. Macdonald bench to be there anymore. I guess no one, I'm definitely speaking mostly for, a smaller group of people, but I think that example of a monument that was made and then, is being propelled to be unmade would actually be a smart way to build monuments, like build it in their own demise into the construction in the first place, and recognition that these things aren't permanent.
Totally.
That might be a really great segue, Evan. If you're open to sharing with us, if you're cool with that, would you?
Yeah. My presentation's like a little bit related to that anyway.
Oh, perfect.
So specifically about the architecture of the building. So I'm on a phone, so I'm going to see if I can screen share here. Just bear with me for a second. Okay. Oh, let's see. Oops. Bear with me here.
No worries.
If you have trouble, Evan, I could also screen share your images and then you could speak to them.
Yeah, that might work best. It's asking me to sign up for something. So yeah, if you could screen share, Jordan, that would be great.
Can do.
Thank you. Yeah, so maybe while Jordan's getting that set up, I'll just talk a little bit of background about my approach to this. So this is kind of tangentially related to the ideas that I think about in my own art practice. A lot of my work is kind of about ideas around the everyday, and particularly about sort of like the more banal aspects of the everyday, like routine and such. And I did 3 little sketches with ink and watercolor, reflecting on spaces of the Confed Center that I'm really familiar with and have spent a lot of time. So I currently work at the center as the visual arts educator at the gallery. But I, like Jordan, I grew up in Prince Edward Island. I've been going there my whole life, whether that be, you know, seeing shows at the theater, or spending a lot of time at the art gallery in high school, spending a lot of time there in high school. And like these drawings are specifically kind of responding to the architecture of the building and how unwelcoming it can feel. I know a lot of people really like brutalist architecture, but I find it to be such a cold and almost like inhumane style of architecture. You know, it's just concrete, it's very cold, and that even translates into the interior of the building itself. But for these drawings, I was thinking of sites that are built in a way that don't really make sense in a lot of ways. So I'll start with this drawing of the entrance to the art gallery. And I guess I'll talk about kind of the logic of the drawings. So the line drawing aspects are aspects that are currently actually there, and then the watercolor parts that I've added in are the additions that I've made. And my way of thinking about this is kind of trying to change the architecture in a way that makes it more usable and more friendly to the public. I find even just like the fact that the entire plaza is elevated like 7 feet above the rest of Charlottetown is like in itself very unwelcoming and extremely inaccessible to certain groups of people. And for this one, I'm thinking about how you actually get to the entrance of the art gallery from street level. So if you've ever actually been there, in order to get to the art gallery, you either have to go around the back of the building and kind of walk upstairs there, or you have to walk all the way to the end of the street, upstairs onto the plaza, and then walk all the way back if you're walking from like Grafton Street or wherever. And they have these little kind of steps that do go up to where the art gallery entrance is, but it's all gardens along there. It seems like the perfect place for like a staircase or a ramp to be able to, you know, just quickly get from the sidewalk up to the gallery. And, you know, a lot of people, myself included, often just like jump up those steps, which are also quite, tall. They're like, I don't know, I want to say like 3 to 4 feet each in height. So they're even inconvenient to use as stairs. So I added a little bit of a drawing of a staircase, and I think even doing that would like allow people to gain access to the building a little bit better. This staircase issue is actually something that's been talked about quite a bit. And, the inaccessibility of that Grafton Street entrance to the gallery kind of comes to the point where like some people don't realize that that's actually an entrance that you can go into the building from. I know I didn't until somebody told me that you could come in. I thought that you had to like go into the building and you could only enter it from inside. So Jordan, if you want to move to the next one, I can talk about that one too. Okay, so this one is a quick little sketch of Memorial Hall, which is essentially a giant empty room. And the idea behind Memorial Hall is that it's supposed to be, it's kind of like the monument to Confederation. There's a little bit of text on the wall in there, kind of explaining the purpose of the room. And it's this giant kind of open space, but most of the time there's nothing in it at all. And I realize that part of that is kind of because of the function of the room. It often does serve as like a place for presentations and things like that. But especially right now, the idea of having this, well, right now it's extremely empty. There aren't even the regular like small tables and chairs that are usually kind of lining the edges of the room. But I kind of think that the potential of this space is like a little bit lost because most of the time it just sits empty. So for this part of this drawing in particular, I was thinking about like, well, how could it be used in a way that's beneficial to the public, aside from being a place to host the occasional event. So I drew in some like comfy couches, some chairs, some bookshelves that could possibly contain resources related to the history of colonization in Canada, if we're thinking about trying to reframe the way that we're thinking about monumentalizing Confederation. Yeah, and just making this like a bit more of a welcoming space to the public rather than just like a vacant room that's occasionally used for like public talks. And then the next one, thank you, is this is a drawing from one of the areas of the plaza. So the right of the drawing is where that big concrete amphitheater is. And I added like a green kind of color over top of it, just because there's so much empty concrete space outside, and a lot of space that's just like totally unused that could be used as green space for people to relax in, to sit and read. People do eat their lunch in this area, but it always seems kind of sad. And even whenever I've eaten outside before, I'm always like, well, this is like a little bit uncomfortable. I'm just sitting on concrete. It's cold. It's uncomfortable. And I'm thinking especially about, I went to Toronto last year and went to the Art Gallery of Ontario for the first time. And that giant kind of almost like a park that they have right outside of their building is kind of an amazing place to gather with friends. Like I remember seeing so many people like, studying for exams out there, chatting with people, playing with their dog and those sorts of things. And I think there's a lot of potential for that kind of space in the exterior of the Confederation Center, but currently it's just like cold concrete, pretty barren. I even called this drawing barren alleyway, because it's like just kind of like a weird cold space that it seemed like maybe they didn't really know what to do with it. So yeah, those are the three drawings and kind of my ideas behind them. If anyone has any questions or comments.
Thank you, Evan. That was amazing. That was and thank you for sharing your drawings. My gosh, and your perspective. It's really there's some really great questions here in the group. Maybe Angela, do you want to start about talking about the one question that you had about
Yeah.
the scale? Think about scale. And,
yeah. Well, first of all, I love your drawing.
Oh, thank you.
Really that sort of sense of feeling that space. Yeah, I think there's so many things, like just how, like, maybe in design, you know, I can imagine this kind of step that steps up to the buildings in the center as being, you know, thought of as, you know, formally and as this beautiful element. But of course, if it becomes a question of access, then, you know, how do we reconcile this idea between form and function? But most interesting for me was the image inside the center of where the actual monument is. This the same space with the replica of the table where the thing was signed?
No, it's a different. It's there's a photo of it in the folder. It's the space that currently has the big dream catcher in it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's like a multi-purpose space. And then
yeah.
you threw in those bookshelves and the chairs, which I think we were just talking while you were speaking. It's like, it's an incredible, just the idea of putting information in bookshelves with you know, texts about decolonization and sort of and the impact of Confederation on various peoples. I think that's it's a beautiful gesture and a suggestion to, in a real sort of subtle way, like the architecture of that space is going to live there, but what we can change is the way the content is arranged. And I think that's something that's really important. And one thing that I thought was really powerful for me, and I think it's in relation to the artist talk that we had yesterday, was that a lot of the performance artists that we had were talking about their bodies in space, and the way you were talking specifically about the stairs and walking up the stairs and bodies, and also Jordan talking about, Jordan was talking about some of the ways that you were, when you were working there, Jordan, about your body in that space. I think that your drawings and your observations are super relevant to the way the artists are engaging with these because really brutalist architecture is built for an idealized body. And that's sort of I mean, I'm not an architect or, and maybe the architects here can speak that better, but my understanding is that brutalism has this idea of sort of a mono body and way bodies form, then functionality. And it's really, it's something that I think this intervention of your drawings and your comments really sort of like emphasize that element of like whose body, what body, functionality, and that sort of thing. There's a question from Agre here. Agre, did you want to say it in person? Do you want me to read it for you? I can read it for you. What? Okay. How are monuments related to censorship and public opinion? Please comment on a diversity with a dominant aesthetic. So do you want to comment on that in relation to that?
Or if anyone else here does, I don't, certainly am not have the answers.
Jordan, yeah.
Well, one thing that Karen pointed out that makes me think about Agre's comment as well was Karen just mentioned like the presentness of Anne of Green Gables. Like when you're walking around the center, like you just see a lot of like advertisements for it, like in these videos and things. And I think about like sort of like that dominant narrative and the way it's coupled with like the dominant narrative of Confederation. And then when I think about like, okay, like what do these two things have in common? And I think about this idea of sort of like the idyllic agrarian past, and a past that doesn't create any space for, like the Mi'kmaq, who are always here, also BIPOC newcomers who are like, very present in Charlottetown. Like, I think people have this impression that Charlottetown's like not a diverse city, which is just like inaccurate. That's not true in 2020. And like these dominant narratives don't leave any room for those realities to exist because they're so centered on this historic whiteness. And also this joyous, happy, optimistic whiteness in the process of like colonizing this island. And I think, you know, these dominant aesthetics, you know, as, you know, benign as maybe Anne of Green Gables seems on the surface, are actually things that suppress contemporary diversity and also just like the contemporary reality of like lived experience on PEI. And I think in that way, like they do function as censorship.
Absolutely. Can I invite Karen to come in the conversations? I think she's going to respond really well to some of her, to respond to Evan and Jordan, what you both are saying. So Karen, can I invite you in? I'm not putting in the spot, am I? Can I invite you in to sort of talk about some of your work and your research in relation to these comments?
Sure. I responded a little bit to Agri's question too. You know, this is the question of, is this about inclusion, right? Do you put decolonizing materials inside the Confederation Center, or is revision what's called for, or what completely reshapes those narratives? And there's so much pressure, right? Like there's so much bread and butter bound up in Anne of Green Gables and in those kinds of narratives. And I mean, there's also another angle in here too. Brutalist architecture is very urban architecture, although it's urban architecture that sort of is post-apocalyptic in the sense that it's not imagined with human bodies in mind. And I think Evan's work really points to this clearly. It makes it visible. And it's also designed to be able to lock people in or shut them out. I mean, it does come out of the beginning of the militarizing of domestic spaces that we're seeing now really super enacted around migrants and ICE in the US, the immigration and customs, and so the Jordan points to this too, the lack of light, the lack of windows. So there's a way in which it is a lot about population control, narrative control, monumentality, but it's also about the exclusion of the kinds of constant regrowth and interruption and eruption of the natural environment, and any consideration of both human and non-human actors that are not engaged in this kind of stone. So it is a kind of a cleaning, you know, it's an architecture that is a lot about statecraft as hygiene. And so I think, I mean, I can go on, but I'll stop there. Just gonna put some of those terms out there.
Did you want to present some of your research now, Karen, or how do you feel? Or Evan, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I actually kind of want to respond to Augre's question because he just kind of clarified a little bit. He said, is it possible to decolonize within a colonial context? And I've been thinking about this a lot, especially, you know, working at a building called the Confederation Center. I think maybe it might be futile to try and reform a building that is so steeped in this tradition of, you know, the colonization is literally like in the name of the building and of the mandate of the organization in a lot of ways. And I think that goes back to like why we're so obsessed with like Anne of Green Gables and those sorts of things, because it's part of Prince Edward Island tradition. And, you know, the people here, you know, fairly traditional in a lot of ways, especially in like rural areas like where I grew up. So yeah, I think it's great conversations to have, but I think in a lot of ways it is like trying to reform these things might be a little bit kind of futile in the end, maybe. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that, but.
Does anybody want to respond to that, or we maybe blow it up? Or is there someone? These are great. I want to make sure we have enough time for everybody who has some research to talk today. So we have some other people here, like we have Sage or Karen. Any of you want to go next and talk about your research?
I'm happy to go next. I think
Cool.
I have 5 questions, so I'll try to walk through it quickly. I'm in the sort of maybe not let it erode quickly. I don't know. I think I'm wondering if someone else could just share. It's a single page from a sketchbook. And I can talk about it rather than have me muck around trying to figure out how to do that.
Cool. We'll get Jordan to share.
Sure.
Cool.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, Jordan.
How's that?
Okay, yeah, it might be hard for people to read, but yeah, okay, great, blow it up, that's good. I was working here with 5 questions that sort of unfolded out of each other. And the first one was one I was asking yesterday, what was there before? And initially I thought I would make an object consisting of layers of maps and other sorts of documentation around the Confederation Center and around the first story about the making of PEI out of a lump of mud. And I imagined kind of pulling pieces of paper up out of that. So then you get this sort of seed metaphor. And so I was thinking about what kinds of work as a community. So each of these is a kind of community-oriented question. What kind of work could a number of people engage in to get at this question, what was there before? And so that would be searching, uncovering, sorting, stitching, reconfiguring, relearning, sifting, reemerging, listening. So I was just trying to think about what are those activities as opposed to discovery, exploration. Like I was trying to think about what are words that belong to the spirit really of listening rather than laying out a new foundation. And allowing things to come up through those layers. And so then I was also thinking about, so then this phrase, sparrows shoulder through the trees. I'm a poet, right? So poetry ends up everywhere. And then that made me think about basically the rest of the questions. The second question was, what might grow there now? And so I was thinking about origin stories, the fact that maybe there had been a market there, that it was likely a crossroads given its space, its position in space, maybe that it had been a post office, a meeting place, a resting place. What could it be? And so I imagine, curtains of edible greens and bee and bird habitat, tables, meeting spaces, water. And I start to wonder, well, why aren't those things there? Why isn't that a part of the permanent infrastructure of the space in a sense? So if in fact it's a gathering space, right? So what is under those paving stones is the third question. And I'm thinking about leveling, upheaval, return to grade, and the relationship between stone and water. And I'm thinking about trees, water, boulders, sand, habitat, permaculture. And what would it be to break out the paving stones and what's under there? Why are they there? What's going on with all of that? Is there a massive substructure that houses like vaults and stuff? Like what's under there, and what would it be to undo that? And to make a space that you could walk through in your bare feet, to make a space where people come to refresh themselves, or other creatures even, right? So then the fourth question was, how does the wind sound? So I was thinking about the way that modernist architecture really alters wind flows, and the way that it totally changes the way that the wind sounds. And so I was thinking about the question of whether it would be possible to tune the wind. So how do brutalist monumental buildings alter wind flow? How do their surfaces change the sounds of the wind, of rain? And then where does the water go? Of course, sometimes it goes inside. That's part of the issue, right? But that's in part because it's not been conceived to imagine that the water will flow through it. And then the second question was, what would help us to hear these flows and then to tune them? Could you build wind instruments that in the space, like that would enable you to hear the wind? I'm a sailor, so I think about the way that whenever the wind blows in a marina or in a space where there are boats, you hear the masts fluting. So there's, so I'm thinking about other things like the sound of wind in needles and leaves, one branch rubbing against another one, the sounds of birds, water. And with those things, with trees, with those sorts of things, you get other kinds of water, soil, insects, birds, sounds of drumming. And then the fifth, so these are just associations really, and they're not answers, they're just more questions in a sense. So each question, I try to add the provocations I'm capable of, but I'm sure other people have many other better ones. And then the fifth one, the question, where are all the people in every season? So of course there are these moments when the plazas are full and the buildings are full. Now they're particularly empty, but night and winter, these are times when these are really often very empty spaces. And because they're so elevated, they're also not accessible in a streetscape, right? So, you know, what would it take to make that possible? Fountains, ponds, pools, shade. Jordan's comment about it just being unbearable in the summer. In a space in the world that is not too hot to be in the out of doors, even in the middle of summer. There's a kind of ridiculousness there, like that we've created that. So, and what happens when you have a site like water where people can gather and swap stories and swap food and so on? What's the difference between a space that accommodates our relationships to each other and to the non-human world, and a space that is designed really, I meant that phrase I said before, that brutalist architecture is sort of statecraft as hygiene. It's meant to clean us out and to certainly do away with every non-human life form except now and then a potted plant. So anyway, those were my questions.
Thank you so much, Karen. Oh, sorry, I'm always talking too quiet. Sorry. Wow, yeah, I feel full right now.
That was amazing.
It's very
That was
beautiful.
really beautiful.
Maybe I'll just give opportunity to anyone else in the room if they want to begin the discussion in relation to Karen's provocations.
Or even if they want to share their own research in relation to Karen's provocations as well. It's totally up to you.
Had to put anyone on the spot.
Yeah.
It makes me think about the way that colonial cultures like have this like divide between nature and culture that just like doesn't like exist in like in an indigenous epistemology, but like it's something that like you know we perceive to be true, like we as in like me being like a European person. And I think it's like really representative of what Karen is talking about in this, like, you know, this like cultural space, this like Center for the Arts, and the way it kind of excludes the possibility of there being like natural ecodiversity aside from just like the people and like the potted plants that are there.
Yeah, it makes me think too about like, I'm just going back to Lindsay Dobbins' work, and yeah, I didn't show it yesterday, but another part of that work that I did show was Lindsay's work in relation to a piece of fishing line that was on the beach, and her reflections on how that fishing line, when the wind hit it and it made a sound, was a way of sort of, I think, as you said, Karen, tuning the wind, but really bringing us into awareness of the wind as, you know, a tangible, you know, relational force. And, you know, the word that comes to mind when I listen and look at your questions, Karen, is reciprocity. And how do we think about buildings as engaging in this kind of reciprocal relationship, rather than standing as, you know, a form or a sculpture? Yeah, and in many ways, I just keep thinking it seems like such a missed opportunity to have this huge real estate and this kind of formation or this organization of structures that are so capable of supporting and sustaining, you know, diverse ecosystems. You know, is that a new way to think about brutalism? Is it a, you know, maybe a counter brutalism? Anyway, I don't know if anyone else has some thoughts on that.
Using it as a substrate for something, right?
Awesome. I'm gonna, just for the sake of time, maybe Sage, do you want to go next? How are you feeling? Are you feeling just go? And maybe we can respond and we can continue the conversations with Karen on this. Just want to make sure everyone has a chance to share. Thank you, Karen. That was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to share personally of my own work. I'm just thinking about all these projects kind of looping into one right now from Agres, where the material was there, so he used it and responded to the space. And then that in connection to the people in this space, how that changes it, thinking about Jordan crying in the bathroom at a job or a job space, and how that space changes determinant on what your role is in that space, but then also who is around you there. Like, I'm thinking I could be in like the most beautiful architecture where there's like nice couches and things, but if there's someone or there's something there that is like having a negative response, that completely changes that space as well. And I just love those amateur, I don't want to say amateur, those wonderful videos of people interacting with a space for the complete, maybe not necessarily what the space is for. So I know I've just been totally enjoying thinking about all these responses to a monument as well as a community space, and how often the monument, as Karen was saying, doesn't fit with what we actually need as a community space, and a community space being grander as thinking about also like the environment and the actual place that it is, where instead of like putting a concrete block on a square, being like, okay, now this is a monument, yeah, how it doesn't really interact then with that environment as well, the actual environment that's there, whether we're thinking of the ecosystem or the creatures that are also in that space. So I'm sorry I don't have, I might make something afterwards in response, but I don't have anything to present at the moment. I think it's also interesting now that we're having this this discussion or this panel in this online space, and I wonder if some aspects of the online space, because we're all in our cozy private homes, while having this talk about a very like public space that lacks personal touches, I guess you could say, yeah, I wonder, and now I'm thinking kind of about that extra layer on top about what does it mean now that we're including this virtual space, and maybe more of the public spaces need to have a virtual aspect to them to be more accessible, in the, even just an accessible in the ways that we have our personal into the private. But anyways, I'm just blubbering on. I'm not really good response. I'm like, I don't have anything to present. I'm just loving it.
I love this view. And also what's fun is, I don't know if folks know, but Sage together with Jordan will be designing sort of like this, how some of this research creation conversation will be on our website. So they'll be contacting you after the fact. But yeah, I appreciate your comments. Did you want to, maybe Angela can go on to.
I think mine sort of riffs off of Karen's work a little bit. It was very quick and simple. Mine's in the folder, and off of some of Sage's comments. But you know, like Karen, I was thinking about you know, what's around these spaces, and I was thinking about, you know, I don't know, art history 101, where you learned about minimalism and sort of the interaction, or the body in interaction with the sculpture, or the space around the sculpture is really what's being considered. And in some ways, I feel like, are you able to open that?
I think it's gonna be better if we do it here.
Just that one right there.
Yeah, because better.
And then do a full screen. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, like thinking about, you know, that idea of what's around, and minimalism and brutalism, and how this consideration of the body in relation to the form is actually a way of really centering or monumentalizing, let's say, the object itself, the sculptural object itself. But then, you know, what I did is I took the images that Emily Benoit photographed, and I isolated the skies around the buildings. And then I picked the color points from the skies, given that they were, you know, taken in different angles in relation to the sun and whatever. They all had sort of these tonal ranges of gray and blue. And then I was just trying to sort of piece them together to bring forward the negative space, which is in turn the building, but, you know, kind of oscillates between a topographic and an elevated view at different scales of the Confederation Center. So trying to think about, you know, where do we look to for other, I want to say like sources of inspiration, but, you know, other elements to inform the built environment. So yeah, it's sort of a very quick and not fully developed thought, but
Research.
It's research. So maybe that's it.
Awesome. Because we're hitting 22 almost, there's some other folks here that maybe have some research they want to share, or even just comments. Oh, Anagre's here. Yeah, I love the idea that a space that accommodates non-humans on a human life. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a real challenge for the designers in the room too. It's like, how do you, I mean, first of all, does anyone else want to share their research? Or someone, I think in the folder, Jordan, are there a few more documents in there that we should go through? I saw someone else there that maybe I want to make sure that everyone's included.
Yeah, maybe we can quickly take a look at what Caitlin shared, because I think it relates
Yes.
to Angela's work. And then I see that Nora also posted something, so maybe we could go in that order. I think those are the last two things to take a look at in the folder.
Awesome. Then we'll open up for a general discussion. Thank you.
Do you want me to screen share?
I can share off of my computer. Yep.
Oh, perfect.
Hi. Oh, just kidding. Sorry, I'm going to start by making this full screen. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah, looks
great.
Good.
Okay, so I just want to introduce myself. My name is Caitlin Stairs. I'm in Chibuktuk in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm currently a Master of Architecture student at Dalhousie University, and I'm going to start by very briefly running through my current thesis research, and then I'm going to speak a little bit to what I've done for this conference. So I'm looking at Canadian identity, and I'm studying it through the landscape and the identity of islanders. I grew up kind of on PEI, kind of not. I'm from there. However, I would spend the majority of the years internationally and then only come home in the summers. So I felt in my upbringing, I had a very interesting understanding of place where I was both removed from it and within it and kind of saw it in multiple lenses at once. So I'm kind of using that to inform a study of what it means to be an islander and how the historic procession that people would take via boats to land would then inform place and identity. So I'm going to go through this really quickly because a lot of it doesn't really apply to what we're talking to today. And I know we're on a tight schedule here, so I'm just going to run through it. So yeah, I'm just looking at, again, moving through the island from the scale of the nation. I'm focusing in on Province House, which is very interesting because it's in the same city block as the Confederation Center of the Arts, and it has a lot of the same underlying ideas about it as a monument and as an architecture that's supposed to speak to all of the people. So I've created these representations of reading the landscape and distilling the histories of people through multiple parallaxes. So a parallax, just to clarify, is a reading of a place or an object through how you view it in motion. So through different spaces at once, kind of overlaying and collaging to have more informed views of a whole. So I'm doing that to try to understand and view landscape, program, peoples, what they built and what they manifested on the landscape all together to understand what it truly means to be an islander and a Canadian. So again, I'm trying to bring back some, lesser heard voices and erasures to inform what actually the identity of the place is through the landscape. So these we can go through quickly. But yes, I'm following this pathway to study how, the island is experienced and what it is to be an islander, which ends exactly back at Province House. So I'm looking at kind of the lines and the marks that people have made along the way. So both within the water in the form of, the dredging and then the naval routes, and then on land in the form of how we kind of curate and cleanse our landscape to make it work for us, as well as the built environment, obviously. So we can go through this. This is something that I had made a couple months ago, which follows what you shared, Jordan, from the Mi'kmaq Confederacy of PEI. I overlaid their indications of the Mi'kmaq place names atop of colonial names of place that have been assigned to the island since it's existed. Running along the side, I have a timeline of even how the island has been spoken to and the overarching name of the island, which originated coming, as was brought up earlier, from myth, but then turned into kind of an honoring system from the more dominant European colonizer perspective, again, which we've talked a lot about. So then, yeah, there's this whole notion of like landing of the island and ascending to Province House, again, seeing it as a monument and seeing it as this architecture that informs what everyone is. And obviously it's very proximate to Confederation Center. So this doesn't really matter. We can move through this. So then what I have kind of brought to discuss today, I have a couple maps that I took photographs of. I would spend a bit of time doing research for my thesis in the Charlottetown archives this summer. And this map I thought would be a great one to discuss and share. This was created following the first conference. When the Fathers of Confederation first spoke on the island, this is how they represented that momentous moment. And I think it's very interesting in seeing again how this is very exclusionary and even the histories that it depicts and who is and is not indicated within this. But I thought this was interesting because this almost acts as the monument of that moment. And then we see later during the centennial, the architecture of the CCOA becomes that monument. And I think it's very interesting just seeing how this, which is so prescribed and curated for a certain viewpoint and a certain peoples to learn from and appreciate, it then moves into an architecture which does very similar exclusionary things, even though trying to claim that it's a more collective piece of work. And then I brought this map to discuss, or just to share today. I should have zoomed in a little bit. But then this just speaks back to the historic use of the land, which we've talked a bit about. But I thought it was interesting just denoting how we see that building as this one large block, how historically it had been smaller collectives, which I think the site still tries to do. But I think going back to even earlier comments and people's reflections on the site, it doesn't really do that. And it's very exclusionary in how it's designed. So then this is the work that I've created for today. It happened very quickly and it was not, didn't get to the point that I wanted to be at, but I just wanted to have a visual perspective of the layers of histories of the site that have arrived there. So one aspect of my research for my thesis that I'm very interested in is the use of wayfinders in navigating to a place. And I think in Charlottetown, as we've discussed, and as I think Jordan put it so beautifully, you know, people understand that they're there, they're in Charlottetown when they see the Confederation Center. But I think historically that, you know, that was not how the place operated. And I think there were different kind of wayfinders in indicating what it meant to be in Charlottetown. So I just kind of juxtaposed a couple of historic photos of the area and pulled out key buildings that have been erased, not necessarily that speak to all peoples, but speak to a time when there was architecture and there was built form indicating the place, just to see how that's really been changed by the CCOA, even just in its, you know, in its like massiveness, like there's no porosity to it. It's really something that acts almost as a wall more than it does as, you know, like a monument or a wayfinding tool that, you know, is maybe more temporary or more porous. And again, that goes back to it being fairly exclusionary, but that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. It's beautiful work. Sorry, I'm talking quiet again. Yeah, when I look at your work, I immediately am thinking of Janet Cardiff's work. I don't know if did you see the presentation yesterday?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and this mapping time, you know, layers of time onto one another as a way of sort of, you know, connecting to that time, but also reflecting on the present. And so, yeah, it's a very kind of provocative idea of wayfinding, not just in a spatial context, but in a, you know, I guess historical, or I don't know if historical is the right word, but in a time-space context.
I think, you know, well, I find your mapping, could you flip back a bit to some of your slides of some of the mapping that you did? I think
Yeah.
really provocative. And I am just super curious, you know, because I guess what you're doing a thesis in the master's program in architecture right now. Is that what?
Yeah.
So I would just be very curious, because I'm not an architect, and I know there's several architects and architectural professors in here. I'm so curious how all of this research and these maps could inform, you know, an actual structure, because there's just so much research in here, and I would love to hear like even your ideas of how, you know, because what exists right now does not have the complexity of what you put here in terms of research. You know what I mean? In terms of like the building that exists, but you've just proposed so many ways of opening it up. But now I'm curious about what would be a step forward. You just say in your mind, or your utopian idea of like, what would the building look like?
Yeah. That's a great question. That also comes at a very pivotal time. We're coming near the end of this first semester, and we're transitioning into our second semester in the thesis program, and that's when we inform the architecture. So this is the question I've been grappling with over the past couple of days, but I'll show you where I've gotten to with that. So what I've decided to do is unpack this multimodal route that begins as a naval route into the island into 5 nodes, where I think identity has been erased and does not speak to the current, you know, user group and the current identity of Islanders and Canadians. And those come from, this is a little abstract, so bear with me here, but I'm paralleling the arrival to Charlottetown with the ascent to the Acropolis in Athens, speaking to it as like a temple complex where you ascend from almost the profane in a way to the sacred. You're moving through nodes that prepare you for this, you know, this resolved explanation of what it is, and there's a bit of grandeur at the end. So at these nodes, I was going to reinform historic practices at these spaces through the forms that I've discerned from the Acropolis. So I know that's a little jargony and out there, but yeah, each spot would essentially layer histories of all peoples and all forms of monument which they used on those historic sites, and then bring them back into a more modern reading and understanding of this collective root that reinforms all narratives and what it means to be an Islander. So that's, if that, I don't know if that really helps, because there's no specific, you know, architecture yet, but yeah, that's how I'm approaching it at the moment.
No, definitely. And you know, the question of, you know, what in the wake of, you know, this monument to Confederation, what are we monumentalizing? What is integral at this moment in history? And, you know, what should an architecture sort of stand for in relation to identity, nationally, individually, as an islander, etc.
Yeah, definitely. These are the questions I've been grappling with. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. So, I mean, I really wish that we could talk for hours, because I mean, I'd be curious when you present your thesis, maybe if it's public, I don't know. Although now it's COVID world, so I guess you folks aren't going to be presenting it in that big presentation room anymore. I don't know, who knows. But very fascinating, Keelan. Thank you so much for sharing. That's wonderful. We have one more person, I think, in the folder, and I want to make sure we get everyone in before noon, then we can open up for questions. I know people may have to go and have lunch and get ready for the next session. Jordan, who's next on the, who's the last person that we have in the folder?
I think Nora is the last person in the folder who hasn't gone.
Awesome,
Hi.
Nora.
Yeah, I didn't really plan anything, and I'm just very thrilled that I got the chance to experience all your guys' great work. It's really fascinating. So I just put up a picture from my phone that I took because I'm a high school teacher. So I took my students to the gallery last year for a tour. Evan was there and gave us a tour too. And I just thought it was a really funny image because they're all kind of misfits. Most of them had never been to Confederation Center. And that's something that I find interesting and curious, like as a teacher, that probably at least 50% of islanders have never even been inside the building. And so it's kind of neat to take classes of students and see what they think, and all different kinds of learners, like kids with exceptionalities, how they respond to the space is also really interesting too, because every person has different sort of ways of experiencing space, and that comes out. So I really like the boy in the hoodie who's yawning. I just thought that was really funny because it's like the teenager thing who are my sort of clientele. But I guess, yeah, just as someone who's lived in PEI my whole life and like a lifetime of memories with the center, and especially I have children too. So, and as a teacher, I tend to like see things a lot through the eyes of kids, or try to. And like when I think of the center in my own children's life, I can relate a lot to Jordan worrying about the heads being smashed on the concrete and stuff. But as a kid myself, I spent a lot of time in the theater and backstage at the theater because my dad was a teacher, and he ended up like getting the theater as the site for this drama festival that was in the school system for about 15 years. So he would go and like work backstage, helping the schools that would come to present their school plays on the main stage theater. So for me, it was always like this place that we were really lucky to have, because according to the actual numbers of people who live in PEI and in Charlottetown, to have access to like a world-class theater was sort of something that was drilled into me as a kid, was like, we're really lucky to have it. So I don't really have anything to compare with the really amazing, detailed and thoughtful things that you guys have shared today, but just my own experience. And yeah, it's all fascinating. So thanks for letting me come to your presentation.
Oh, I think this, I love your perspective, and this image is just, it's just wonderful. It's very provocative. And I think all of us who are educators in the room feel that sort of like, sense of like, okay, we have this sense of urgency, but then it's very curious to see how other people, because I think also as an architect or when you start teaching, you create the space for the yawner and for that person who's the one person who's maybe looking at the art, the rest of them are sort of looking at the curator, and then one person's looking at the audience. And yeah, the expressions of these people are really, Agre said, are everything. It's really it's really provocative. It's great. And I think it's really important to bring it down to human scale. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's wonderful. And I think the more we have these sort of personal perspectives, I think that's the key whenever we talk about either consultation or researching. We have to bring our body in our personal stories and our perspectives into it. And I think this is like, yeah, it's a wonderful thing to add. I'm really grateful for that. Thank you so much. We have, Agre saying even the painting behind had characters with different expressions. I know that image is just, it's just wonderful. I would like to have maybe, because a 10-minute, maybe anyone else that wants to add something, 10, 15 minutes, so we can make sure everyone has time to eat lunch before our session at 2. Anybody wants to add anything, any comments? There's no pressure to show work, but even just people who are attending just as listening, please, now's the time to sort of just have a general discussion. No. We can also do it in the Q&A if you'd rather type it, but. Oh, Agre, cool. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, it's I've really enjoyed looking through the different approaches. And the last image that we saw, even the characters that were in the background, they had different expressions. The people within the room had different expressions. So it was a moment in time. It was just a moment within that time. Yeah, that's really
Never boring.
I'd be curious, like, again, people talking about the whole, we talk about the city of research creation, and I think, of course, this is a very strict period of time, but I'm really grateful for, those that were able to take the time to sort of, present their reflections on this space. And what I found really, really provocative is really the personalization of some of this research. And I think that's just really, it's so valuable for people as they start thinking about spaces and start thinking about researching about, what does it mean to augment these existing spaces that are there, both in our minds, but also something that, maybe can expand our interactions with our workplaces and our communities. So I thought that was really, really, really valuable.
Mm-hmm. So. And what sort of comes out of, quickly doing something. I don't know. I always feel like, what is sort of done in the moment that way says a lot about what's at the forefront of their minds, rather than, laboring with something.
Exactly. Cool. Does anybody in the audience want to, we can wrap up, or we can, is there any other comments? Okay. I wish that we were all in PEI. Jordan, thank you so much for all of your work. I'm very grateful for being our, the ambassador. Now that you're officially cut off from the rest of the mainland, because with the bubble, but everyone in PEI, very grateful for your time, and everyone out here, and all the architect professors and people that are, and Alec and Jane, who are here, sort of listening to everybody and collecting some of these comments. It's great to have you here. And I'm sure this conversation will continue. And one thing I just want to note that Sage and Jordan will be contacting those folks who presented their research today, and to get permissions and stuff like that. And we are going to sort of publish all of this on our website, so it's something that can be reviewed and archived. So just be ready for some emails from our incredible research collaborators. So thank everybody so much. And I want to remind everybody that at 2 o'clock today, Halifax time, we will be having our last session, and this has been really wonderful. I've been totally inspired, and thank you everybody for your work. And we'll see you at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your lunches.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sol and Angela, so much too.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.